number 7, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
Mr Speaker, this question is to the Associate Minister of Education and asks, is she happy with the process to find a contractor for the Northland College rebuild? If so, why?
The Honourable Hikia Parata.
Mr Speaker, on behalf of the Associate Minister, yes, because the procurement of the main contractor to undertake the rebuild follows well-established and transparent government and ministry guidelines for procuring government services. An open invitation to all organisations interested in undertaking the works was published on the government electronic tender system, GETS. All organisations that responded by close on 28 October were assessed against the published criteria. A short list of organisations to proceed was chosen by a panel made up of external experts as well as ministry people. I am advised that the ministry expects to make a decision and award the contract by the end of November. I have brought along a copy of the tender document for the members' information.
Supplementary question.
Supplementary question.
I was reading that before you left school. Of the Northern... Yes, I was, actually.
Order. If the member wants to ask his question, document. Just proceed to do so.
Yeah, well, I am going to do that. Of the Northern-based contractors that made expressions of interest, how many were approved to the next stage?
The Honourable Hikia Parata.
Mr Speaker, I do not have that information because it is an operational matter and it would be inappropriate for a minister to be intervening in it.
Supplementary question.
Order. Supplementary question, Right Honourable Winston Peters.
What hope is there for regional economic development when at least one major contractor in Northland was never contacted after making an expression of interest?
The Honourable Hikia Parata.
Mr Speaker, I've just outlined the process and I have advised the member and the House that no final decision has been made. So I'm not in a position to tell the member who is going to be appointed and whether or not they come from the local area or outside. But what I can tell the member is that this government has invested $14 million in Northland College.
Order. Point of order, the Right Honourable Winston.
Speaker, I asked a precise question with respect to the effect on regional economic development.
Order, but I remind you, you're asking questions to the Associate Minister of Education.
Beg your pardon? I beg your pardon?
The member's asking supplementary questions to the Associate Minister of Education.
Well,
it's not a question about regional development. Would the member please ask a supplementary question in line with standing orders?
Mr Speaker...
Order, can we just have a supplementary question, please?
Do you want me to repeat the question?
No, I want the member to ask a supplementary question, otherwise we can move on.
Mr Speaker, I asked a question, but I didn't get an answer.
Ask your supplementary question, otherwise I'm moving on.
All right, then. Does she agree? Well, we know what this is.
Order. Now that we've got the member ready to ask his question, could we have some silence on my right-hand side so I can hear it?
You know what this is? Does she agree that it is common sense to award the building contract, and I emphasise the word building contract, handled by the Associate Minister of Education's office, I might add, to a Northland-based contractor, no, that's for clarity, so no one's in doubt, to a Northland-based contractor that will create more jobs for the region? If not, why not?
Either of the two supplementary questions, the Honourable Hikia Parata.
On behalf of the Associate Minister, can I repeat that I cannot answer that without the process having been completed and we know who the main contractor is. But what I can tell the member is that $14 million for Northland College is a significant investment, and education alone has invested over $100 million into Northland over the last 5 years. That's without all the...
Order. The question's now been answered. Order. Question number 8, Dr. Jan Yang.
Mr Speaker.
Order.